It's not often that I refer to stuff, especially since they showed us during the years of the Ardern tyranny how dishonourable they were in failing to show both sides of the New Zealand societal perspectives. Those who went along with Jacinda, they trumpeted at every turn. Those who stood up against Jacinda, like me and many others, they derided and tried to put about lies and very many dishonourable mentions when we were simply trying to say to our fellow New Zealanders, hey, hold on, this is a government that is pushing a medical procedure deep inside your body, and we have known for decades, we've known since I was a very young girl, we've known far beyond that, right back to World War I, do not believe our government, ever. We must always have critical thinking. We must always ask, is this smiling-faced, in Jacinda Ardern's case, this grinning woman who's telling us that she's the one source of truth, is this really believable? And we only have to go back to George Orwell's 1984 to know that that was virtually a line out of that. Beyond that, we have to look at her background as a communist. We have to look at her training in Tony Blair's office, and he is an absolutely dyed-in-the-wool globalist from the UN and the WEF and the WHO and what they want to bring in. And our country is really a sitting duck for it because not enough New Zealanders are standing up yet. They want to bring in Agenda 2030. The window of time for us to push back on this in New Zealand or Canada or the United Kingdom or across the ditch in Australia, they're very much falling to it. The window is closing. And we must come together with strong critical thinking and even stronger voices saying, no, we do not want your globalist agenda for my family and my children's future. That's all I've tried to do, point up the terrible flaws. Well, here we have a letter in Stuff, and it's from Ian Taylor. And I thought it was such a fine letter that I would read it out today. And you can make of it what you want, but I do respect that he admits that he was a great fan, that he was seduced and pulled in by what were very plausible ways of speaking from Ardern. But like many of us, if we walk past a bookshop and see that dreadful book with its awful gaslighting title from Jacinda Ardern in the window, he too is starting to feel sickened by the gaslighting and the hypocrisy. Have a listen to his letter. Dear Jacinda, this is not the first open letter I've written to you. You may recall there were many during the COVID pandemic. This, however, is by far the most difficult. I recently appeared before the Royal Commission, charged with looking into the handling of the COVID pandemic in 2021-22. It was an opportunity to revisit all the correspondence I shared with you and government ministers at the time. I also reread the many emails and letters I had received from people who found themselves locked on the wrong side of, quote, be kind, cast adrift from the, quote, waka, the boat we were all meant to be on board. The Commission will deliver its report undoubtedly with the benefit of a lot more evidence than I shared, and that's as it should be. But as I passed through Auckland Airport this week, on my way to Europe, your memoir, A Different Kind of Power, was front and centre. The 22-hour flight seemed the perfect time to address the personal dilemma I am faced with every time I see the cover of that memoir. In March 2019, when you stood before the world following the Christchurch mosque attacks, wearing a hijab headscarf and offering the words, "They are us," I believed I was witnessing something extraordinary. The world noticed too. In Dubai, your image, projected onto the world's tallest building, went viral. It sent a remarkable message to the world. Here was a woman, a working mum, a world leader, our Prime Minister, being honoured in a way few other world leaders had ever been. It was here that the Jacinda brand was born. They are us. Just 3 words, but the world took note. I was travelling a lot at the time. COVID still lay in wait in a place called Wuhan. I had never been prouder to claim I was a Kiwi, where once the questions were about the All Blacks, Lord of the Rings, or how many sheep we had, now all anyone wanted to know about was our Jacinda. You had become a symbol of enlightened leadership. And I confess, I basked unashamedly in the glow of that recognition. You were us. My belief, my pride held strong through the early months of the COVID pandemic. Your calm demeanour, the repeated calls to be kind, reassured a nation facing the unknown. When you then told us we were a team of 5 million and that, he waka eke noa, we were all in this together, I trusted you. I believed you. And that's how we went into our first lockdown, one of the strictest in the world, and at the time, arguably one of the most effective. For a short period of time, we reconnected not just with each other, but with the world around us. The sound of early morning traffic replaced by the sound of tui and bellbirds. Strolling down streets, greeting neighbours, a simple act we'd forgotten how to do. Now we took the time to notice each other, respectfully distanced, of course. We came out of that first lockdown the envy of the world. As pictures of the America's Cup in Auckland were beamed to almost 1 billion people globally, I was inundated with messages from international colleagues asking if they could have Jacinda come and take care of them. My response was always one of pride. Nah, mate, she's ours. But as time passed, the reality began to fray around the edges. The PR slogans, be kind, and we're all in this together, felt increasingly hollow as divisions deepened and the promises faded into spin. My first open letter to you was an urgent plea. We had done incredibly well, but now was the time to move the focus from saving lives to saving lives and livelihoods. It was not a matter of if, but when the coronavirus would break through our seriously flawed MIQ blockade. We had the skills, we had the knowledge, we had the opportunity to really lead the world when that happened. People put politics aside and tried to help, offering real solutions, safe, proven ways to save both lives and livelihoods. Business-led initiatives, technology-enabled tracking, controlled pilot programs. These were not abstract ideas. They were tested, they were ready, and they were offered in good faith. But they were dismissed, not because they didn't work, but because they didn't fit the narrative. That was the moment I realized this wasn't leadership anymore. It was brand management. The turning point came for me on the day you featured on the cover of the New Zealand Woman's Weekly in designer clothes, smiling, styled, and celebrated. On that same day, I received a heart-wrenching email from a father who had yet to meet his 7-month-old son. He had been brought to New Zealand to contribute his much-needed technical expertise in challenging times for Aotearoa, but the border closed behind him, stranding his pregnant wife overseas. In the same week, I had another message from a son trying to leave MIQ to be with his dying father. He had tested clear 3 times. The system still said no. And these weren't isolated stories. They were everywhere if you took the time to listen. People reaching out for someone, anyone, to hear their call, someone to be kind. There were New Zealanders or people who had made this country their home, asking only for the chance to be with their families, to do what any of us would hope to do in a time of crisis. Their pain was real and avoidable. But we were no longer all in the waka together. Thousands had been cast adrift. Fathers kept from the birth of their children. Dying loved ones left without final goodbyes. Families cruelly separated by a system that, even when shown better ways to operate, refused to budge. And editor's note here, I would add to this part of the letter, many families completely torn apart because some members chose not to take the poison shots and others forced them or wanted to force them because of the amount of propaganda coming from the government and the propagandized shill legacy media outlets in New Zealand. That's a note from Liz. Back to Ian Taylor's letter. The brand that was so carefully nurtured at those 1 o'clock single source of truth press conferences, reinforced internationally by features like your Vogue cover story, had matured into a global product ready for sale. Reports say you received over $1 million in advance for your memoir, A Different Kind of Power. It's a striking figure, especially for someone who once made child poverty her personal mission. You didn't just speak about it. You took on the portfolio yourself, armed with the unprecedented power of a parliamentary majority and the goodwill of a nation ready for change. You had the platform. You had the mandate. And yet today, child poverty remains largely unchanged. The capital gains tax was another moment you could have seized with that majority, but the brand shifted, and somewhere along the way too, so had the ideals that once gave me hope. Children are still suffering from poverty. Guns remain in the hands of those who use them to cause the most harm. The Christchurch call has failed to limit online violence and hate, and Brian Tamaki and his Destiny Church still feel free to march in Aotearoa, spewing their anti-migrant vitriol. They Are Us has disappeared down the same dark hole as Be Kind, the team of 5 million, and He Waka Eke Noa, we are all in the waka together. Now only brand Jacinda remains. And you are back on the cover of those lifestyle magazines, interviews on radio and TV, and there, that image that has weighed on me over the past few weeks, the cover of A Different Kind of Power. He waka mo ko tahi. The journey is complete. The waka is now the waka for one. I commend Stuff for at least having the courage to publish this letter, and I very much commend Ian Taylor. There is no mention of the enormity of the damage that Jacinda did, sending in brute cops to a completely peaceful gathering of the Freedom Village at the beginning of 2022, when the footage still, Ian Taylor, if you ever want to make a documentary of that, the footage is so horrifying, and people from all over the country would send you their footage, their photographs, to show you the contrast, how it was as a beautiful coming together of real New Zealand, contrasted with the brutes who came in with gas bottles and poison and hitting and hurting and burning and destroying and crushing and injuring good New Zealanders who were simply there to say to Jacinda Ardern, please walk down the steps of Parliament and listen to the people who supposedly voted you into power. If indeed we did, if that outcome of the election really was an honest outcome, and it behoves us all now to question whether it was. We truly let the brutes in at the gate. We truly have allowed the liars to run rampant since she rose to power. And it's up to us all now to look back at those years, research more deeply, question more thoroughly, and to be absolutely horrified at her self-promoting book in which she claims to be a kind leader. I interviewed people who, I think one of the best examples, well, there are many who were jab injured, who are still being totally ignored. There was a 23-year-old girl right at the beginning of her life, Casey Hodgkinson, in love, loved her job, took it in complete trust of Jacinda. And that interview went to 260,000 people in 10 days, and I don't think it's moved on YouTube since. They simply shadow banned it. They turned off the ticker. They stopped it reaching New Zealanders. But that interview was sent by many, many supporters of Free NZ to Jacinda Ardern, to all the parliamentarians. Not one replied. And then one other example of hundreds of people that we've interviewed. A woman who had several disabled children and looked after them was told that in order to get the government support for her disabled children, she had to be jabbed, even though none of them went anywhere and she looked after them at home. She had it. She had a full attack, assault, reaction, we'll say, from it, and basically died and had to be brought back to life. She set that out.
How would she feel if Neve had as many issues as our children did and needed her mother 24/7 to keep her alive, and she was put in this position? Support your family, to keep your kids alive, to keep everything going. You have to risk death.
She set out what had happened to Jacinda Ardern in letters, to Ashley Bloomfield, to Chris Hipkins, to all of them. Ashley Bloomfield wrote back and said, "Yes, you must have the second one, but we will have a crash cart ready in case you die again." And that was not exceptional. The forcing, the intimidating, the blackmailing, the absolute manipulation of New Zealanders to take this poison has never been discussed here on Stuff. And it has never been discussed in the wider legacy media, and it has certainly never been put to Jacinda Ardern by Oprah Winfrey and her pathetic, grovelling, not even worth watching interviews now. They are all part of a system. They are part of the globalist system that wants to bring in Agenda 2030. They are driven by Marxist and communist ideology. They want to bring the West, and that includes New Zealand, to our communal knees so that we are begging them for help again. But this time it will be, yes, we'll give you a universal basic income, a pittance, as long as you stay in smart cities. S in smart stands for surveillance. M stands for monitoring. So that you're fully monitored, you're shut in, your electric car can be turned off if you do the wrong thing. You are subject to a digital ID so we can track and trace you everywhere. And we will have a central bank digital currency so that you can no longer speak out against any government, or your bank account, your access to funds will be shut out. So I finish this reading of Ian Taylor's letter with a thank you to Ian Taylor for being brave. Ian, there is still much, much more I could tell you. Please contact me at liz.gunn@freenz.org. It would be wonderful if you could be part of a film capturing the voices, and there are many references I and others in the freedom movement can give you, capturing the horror of what was truly done to those with the courage to say no, which is surely what your forebears and my forebears fought for in World War I and World War II, the freedom to stand up and say no to any form of perceived or actual tyranny. So a thank you to Ian Taylor, and please look at this Agenda 2030 outline of the sweet words, they say, the honeyed words, like Ardern, always the honeyed words, but the actual brute goals that those words are talking about. Please stand up now and push back on the globalists, and do not think that Chris Luxon is any different. He and Labour, National and Labour, are justifiably called the Uni Party. Please stand together.